The final battle had begun. The alien forces, now enraged and determined to finish what they started, descended on Earth with a ferocity that left nothing untouched. Cities burned under the weight of their advanced weaponry, and the sky was filled with their dark warships. The human resistance, though vastly outnumbered, held their ground with a courage that surprised even their own commanders. Captain Jake Sterling, the symbol of human strength and resilience, stood at the forefront of his team, ready for the final push. His eyes, though tired and battle-worn, were filled with an unyielding fire. He knew that this wasn't just another battle. This was humanity's last stand. Jake's team had spent weeks preparing for this moment. They knew the enemy was stronger, better equipped, and more ruthless than anything humanity had ever faced. But there was something the aliens couldn't account for: the human spirit. It was something they had underestimated since the very beginning. And now, at the precipice of destruction, humanity would show them just what that spirit could do. Jake gave his final orders to his squadron. It wasn't about brute force anymore. It was about outsmarting the invaders, using everything they had learned in the past few weeks to turn the tide. "We fight smart, we fight together," Jake said to his team. "We are not going to lose this." The air was thick with tension as the human forces dug in and prepared for the oncoming assault. The alien warships darkened the sky, blocking out the sun as they moved into position to launch the final strike. The weapons they carried were unlike anything humans had ever seen, capable of obliterating entire cities with a single shot. It seemed impossible that any force on Earth could withstand such power. But Jake's team was ready. They had been preparing for this day, not just with weapons and tactics, but with something far more valuable: unity. As the alien ships began to fire, the first wave of destruction hit. Massive blasts of energy tore through the landscape, leveling entire buildings in a matter of seconds. Yet, despite the overwhelming power of the attack, the human forces fought back with everything they had. The streets that were once filled with fear and chaos now echoed with the sounds of defiance. Soldiers, civilians, and resistance fighters stood side by side, their determination unshaken, their resolve stronger than ever. Jake's team had a plan, one that depended not on matching the aliens in firepower, but on using their own environment to their advantage. The terrain, the structures, and even the alien technology they had scavenged from previous battles would become their weapons. They used everything from abandoned vehicles to modified communication devices to create traps and ambushes, striking from unexpected places. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to create confusion among the alien forces. The more the aliens pushed forward, the more they found themselves falling into the humans' clever traps. The battlefield, once dominated by alien technology, was now an equal playing field. Meanwhile, Supreme Commander Xalvor, the alien leader who had once laughed at humanity's potential, watched from the safety of his command ship. He had expected a quick victory, a simple eradication of the human resistance. But what he saw unfolding before him on Earth was unlike anything he had ever anticipated. The humans weren't retreating. They weren't running. They were fighting back with a ferocity that was beyond comprehension. Xalvor's disbelief quickly turned into anger. He couldn't understand it. How could these fragile, primitive creatures keep pushing forward when every advantage lay with the invaders? He had underestimated them, and now it seemed like it might cost him everything. Jake knew they couldn't hold out forever. The aliens would eventually adapt to their guerrilla tactics, and they would find a way to retaliate. But for now, they had gained the upper hand, and it was enough. As the battle raged on, Jake's thoughts were focused on one thing: the final showdown with Xalvor. It was the only way to end this. If he could defeat the alien commander, humanity's victory would be assured. The two forces had been dancing around each other for days, each side trying to outthink the other. But now it was time for the last act. Jake made his way to the front lines, where a small group of soldiers had set up a hidden base of operations. They were close to the alien command ship, the heart of the invaders' strategy. Jake could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had fought in many battles, but this one was different. This was humanity's future, their last chance to prove they weren't just a passing species, easily wiped out by those stronger and smarter. This was the fight that would define everything. As Jake and his team approached the alien command ship, they faced a final wave of opposition. Alien soldiers, heavily armored and equipped with advanced weapons, were waiting for them. The humans had only one advantage left: surprise. They launched a coordinated assault, using the terrain to their advantage, taking out one enemy soldier at a time. The air was filled with explosions, the sound of gunfire, and the occasional shout of victory. The team was working like a well-oiled machine, each member fulfilling their role to perfection. Finally, after what felt like hours, Jake found himself face to face with Zalvor. The alien commander stood tall, a hulking figure dressed in black armor, his eyes glowing with fury. "So the humans still fight," Zalvor sneered, his voice cold and full of contempt. "You are nothing. You cannot win." Jake stood tall, his own weapon ready, but he didn't immediately attack. Instead, he spoke, his voice calm yet filled with the weight of everything that had led up to this moment. "You don't understand, do you?" Jake said. "We've never been about strength. We've never been about the size of our weapons or the power of our armies. We fight because we have to. We fight because we can never stop fighting. That's what makes us different." Zalvor scoffed, charging toward him with a roar. But Jake was ready. With a quick, fluid motion, he dodged the alien's attack and countered with precision. The two clashed in a violent struggle, the ground beneath them shaking with each blow. Zalvor was stronger, but Jake was faster. He used his environment, his agility, and his relentless spirit to wear the alien down. The fight raged on, but slowly, Zalvor's arrogance began to fade. Jake's strategy was working. The alien leader was tiring, and it wasn't long before Jake saw his opportunity. With one final strike, Jake drove his blade into Zalvor's chest, the alien leader falling to the ground, defeated. The remaining alien forces, watching their leader fall, hesitated. For the first time in the entire invasion, they weren't sure what to do. Jake stood over the fallen commander, his breath heavy but victorious. The battle was over. The alien forces, seeing their leader's defeat, began to retreat. As Jake watched the last of the alien ships disappear into the sky, a sense of relief washed over him. The war was not over, but humanity had proved its worth. They had faced impossible odds and come out victorious. And in that moment, Jake realized that it wasn't just the aliens who had underestimated humanity. It was the humans themselves. Their strength wasn't just in their bodies or their technology. It was in their spirit. And no matter what the future held, that spirit would never be broken. Captain Jake Sterling had always known that the war would be long and brutal. As a child, he had read stories of great heroes, warriors who fought against overwhelming odds and emerged victorious. He never imagined that he would become one of those heroes. But here he was, standing in a dimly lit command room on a space station orbiting Earth. The steady hum of the station was a constant reminder of the fragile world below. But Jake was focused on the task at hand, preparing for the final assault against the alien invaders. Jake's mind wandered as he stared at the data streams on the holographic display in front of him. He had been through countless battles, leading his troops into danger time and again, but this was different. This wasn't just another skirmish, it was humanity's last chance. The aliens were unlike anything Earth had ever encountered. Their advanced technology, superior strength, and strategic brilliance had crushed every human defense they had faced. Yet there was one thing they hadn't accounted for: the human will to survive. Jake's eyes narrowed as he thought back to the beginning of the war, when Earth was blindsided by the alien invasion. No one had expected it. The aliens, tall, powerful creatures with sleek, black armor and eyes that glowed with an unnatural light, had come out of nowhere. At first, their ships were mistaken for natural phenomena, perhaps meteor showers or strange cosmic anomalies. But then the explosions started. The first attack wiped out entire cities in an instant. It was only after the initial devastation that humanity realized what they were up against: a war-hungry alien empire bent on conquering Earth. Jake was just a soldier at the time, one of many who fought in the trenches of the early battles. But he quickly rose through the ranks. His ability to think on his feet, his uncanny knack for making split-second decisions, and his relentless drive to protect his fellow soldiers made him a natural leader. He had survived more battles than most could imagine, earning the respect of his comrades and the fear of the alien forces. But despite his success, Jake was haunted by the horrors he had witnessed. The destruction, the lives lost, and the overwhelming sense of helplessness that gripped humanity as the war raged on. He had seen entire battalions wiped out in minutes, their screams echoing in his mind. The reality of the war was far from the heroic tales he had read as a child. It was during one of these dark moments, after a particularly brutal fight, that Jake had come across a strange piece of alien technology. It wasn't much, just a small device that seemed to have no obvious purpose. But Jake knew better than to dismiss anything that the enemy used. He had his team examine the device, and to their surprise, they discovered that it contained detailed schematics of the alien fleet, war strategies, weapons blueprints, and even an analysis of human weaknesses. The data was invaluable, a treasure trove of information that could turn the tide of the war. Jake's decision to keep this discovery secret, hidden from both the alien forces and his superiors, was a gamble, but one he was willing to take. It was a risk he had to take, for humanity's sake. As he stood in the command room, Jake's thoughts turned back to his current mission. The transmission from Earth had been clear. The aliens were preparing for their final strike. The invasion had reached its climax. It was time for humanity's last stand, and Jake was to lead the charge. He was the only one who could. He had been chosen not just for his leadership skills, but for something else, something deeper. Jake had seen the alien forces up close. He understood their strategies, their weaknesses, and most importantly, he had the will to win. The kind of will that the aliens could never understand. As he prepared to meet with his team, Jake thought about how far humanity had come. He remembered the first days of the war, when humanity had been paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. People had no idea what to do. The government had been in disarray, and military leaders were scrambling to organize a defense. But something happened along the way. The human spirit, something the aliens had underestimated from the start, began to shine through. People, everyday citizens, stepped up. Farmers, scientists, teachers, everyone had a role to play in the fight for survival. The world had come together in a way that no one thought possible. Jake's team reflected that unity. It wasn't just about him. He had never been the type of leader to take all the credit for himself. His squad was made up of individuals from all over the world, each bringing their unique skills to the table. There was Lieutenant Maria Ruiz, an expert in alien technology, who had been invaluable in deciphering the alien weapon systems. There was Sergeant David O'Neill, a former Navy SEAL, whose ability to strategize under pressure was second to none. And then there was Dr. Olivia Park, a brilliant scientist who had worked tirelessly to develop countermeasures against the alien weapons. Each of them had their own story, their own reason for fighting, but they all shared one thing in common: an unbreakable resolve to protect humanity. Jake walked into the briefing room, where his team was already gathered. Their faces were grim, but there was a quiet confidence in the air. They knew what was at stake. They knew the risks, but they also knew that if anyone could pull off the impossible, it was them. Jake stood in front of them, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, but he kept his voice steady and calm. "We don't have much time," he said, his gaze sweeping over the team. "The aliens are preparing for a full-scale assault. This is our last chance to stop them. We've got one shot at this, and we need to make it count." He paused, letting the weight of the moment sink in. He could see the determination in their eyes. They were ready. "I know we're outmatched," Jake continued, "but there's something they don't understand about us. They think we're weak. They think we're inferior. But they're wrong. We've survived this far because of one thing they'll never have: our will to fight, our ability to adapt. We're going to make them regret ever underestimating humanity." A murmur of agreement rippled through the team. Jake could see that they were all in this together, not just as soldiers, but as a family. And with that, they began their final preparation. As they made their way to the hangar, Jake felt a sense of calm wash over him. He had done everything he could to prepare for this moment. He had trained his team, gathered the intelligence, and made the hard decisions. Now, all that was left was to fight. And Jake knew one thing above all else: they wouldn't go down without a fight. The final assault was about to begin. The countdown to the final assault had begun. Jake Sterling stood on the bridge of the space station, gazing out into the vastness of space. Earth was visible in the distance, a blue and green marble floating in the black void. It was a sight that should have been beautiful, yet now it was a constant reminder of the battle humanity was fighting to preserve. The aliens had come from the far reaches of the galaxy, seeking to conquer and destroy everything in their path. But Jake and his team weren't going to let that happen. This was their home, and they would fight to the last breath to protect it. The air was thick with tension as his team prepared for the most critical phase of their mission. They had gathered every piece of intelligence, every weapon, and every plan they could. The alien invaders were relentless, their forces overwhelming. But Jake knew they had one advantage the aliens could never understand: human ingenuity. While the aliens had advanced technology, superior strength, and vast numbers, they lacked the adaptability that had defined humanity for centuries. It was that adaptability that Jake was counting on to turn the tide of the war. Jake paced back and forth in the command center, mentally running through the battle plan. It wasn't complicated, but it was risky. The idea was simple: strike fast, strike hard, and use the element of surprise to create confusion within the alien ranks. They had already managed to infiltrate some of the alien communication systems, and Jake was counting on their ability to disrupt the invaders' command structure. The human forces, although smaller and less equipped, had learned to fight in ways that the aliens couldn't predict. Their tactics were unconventional, unpredictable, and it was that unpredictability that had caused the aliens to underestimate them in the first place. Captain Sterling wasn't naive enough to think this would be easy. He knew the aliens had planned for this final assault for months, possibly even years. Their fleets were formidable, and they had the firepower to level entire cities in an instant. But Jake also knew that humanity had something else going for them: unity. Across the globe, people had put aside differences, and now they stood together as one. The resistance forces, though scattered and disjointed at times, had come together for this very moment. Jake's team, the core of the resistance, had become a symbol of hope for billions of people. The success or failure of this mission would determine the future of Earth. "Status report," Jake said, his voice steady as he turned toward his operations officer, Lieutenant Maria Ruiz. "Everything's ready, sir," she replied, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the holographic display in front of her. "All squads are in position. We've got the intel from the alien communication system, and the drones are prepped for the initial strike. We're good to go." Jake nodded. He trusted Maria implicitly. She had been with him from the beginning of this war, and her expertise in alien technology had saved them more times than he could count. She was the one who had managed to crack the alien codes and set up the countermeasures they would need to fight back. "Good. Let's make this count," Jake said, turning toward his team. He could see the determination in their eyes. They knew the odds, and they understood the risks, but they were ready. Sergeant David O'Neill, a former Navy SEAL with a reputation for staying calm under pressure, was checking his weapon for the final time. He was the one who would lead the ground assault, taking his squad into the heart of the aliens' main defense lines. O'Neill had always been the one to go in first, charging into danger without a second thought, and Jake trusted him to handle the most dangerous part of the mission. "We're ready, Captain," O'Neill said, his voice low but filled with purpose. Jake nodded, then turned his attention to Dr. Olivia Park, the team's scientist and strategist. Olivia had spent countless hours studying the alien technology, figuring out how to use it against them. She had developed a device that could disable the aliens' shields, something that had previously seemed impossible. Without it, they would have no chance of breaching the alien defenses. She had worked tirelessly, and now it was time for her hard work to pay off. "Olivia, you're sure this is going to work?" Jake asked, his tone serious. She gave him a reassuring smile, though it was clear that she was as tense as the rest of them. "I'm sure. The device will disrupt their shields for a few minutes, long enough for us to get in close. But we'll have to move fast. Once the shields come back online, we'll be in trouble." Jake nodded, then turned toward the massive holographic map that dominated the center of the room. It displayed the alien command ship in high detail, its size and firepower clear for all to see. The final objective was clear: disable the alien command ship, disrupt their operations, and force them to retreat. "This is it," Jake said, his voice carrying across the room. "We hit them hard and fast. We disable their communication systems first, then breach their defenses. O'Neill's team will take the ground. Olivia, you and Maria will focus on disrupting their shields. Everyone else, be ready for anything." There was no turning back now. The plan was set, and the timing had to be perfect. If they failed, Earth would fall. Jake couldn't afford to fail. He had seen what the aliens were capable of, the devastation they had caused. If they weren't stopped, humanity would be wiped out, just like countless other civilizations before them. With one last look at his team, Jake gave the signal. "Let's move out." The hum of the engines and the whine of the ship's thrusters filled the air as the team made their way to their ships. The hangar was buzzing with activity as the remaining forces prepared for the upcoming battle. Soldiers ran past, their faces set in determination. The air was thick with anticipation. Every soldier knew the importance of this mission. The sound of boots hitting the metal floor echoed, a rhythm of inevitability, as they all prepared for what was to come. As Jake stepped into his ship, the cockpit closed with a solid hiss, sealing him inside. The interface lit up around him, and the ship's systems came online with a soft, reassuring beep. He ran his hands over the controls, checking everything one last time. His mind was focused, but in the back of his mind, he couldn't help but think of the soldiers who wouldn't make it out. He thought of his family back home, of the civilians who were counting on him to protect their future. They had all placed their trust in him, and he would be damned if he let them down. "Ready for launch," he said to his co-pilot, Lieutenant Maria Ruiz. "Ready," she replied, her voice calm and steady. As the ship lifted off, Jake felt the weight of the moment settle over him. He was leading humanity's last stand. He couldn't afford to fail. Not now. Not ever. The battle ahead would be their toughest yet. But Captain Jake Sterling knew one thing for certain. No matter how overwhelming the odds, no matter how fierce the enemy, humanity would never give up. Not as long as there was one person left to fight. And as long as Jake was alive, he would fight. For Earth, for humanity, for the future. The atmosphere in the command center was charged with an electric tension as Jake Sterling's ship cut through the cold expanse of space, flanked by the rest of the resistance forces. His heart pounded in his chest, though his face remained a mask of resolve. Behind him, the massive alien fleet loomed, their warships like dark shadows against the backdrop of the distant stars. The time for planning had passed. The operation was now in full motion, and the fate of humanity rested squarely on their shoulders. "Everything's on schedule, Captain." Maria Ruiz's voice crackled over the comms, her tone cool but professional. "All units are in position. We're ready to make our move." Jake's grip tightened on the control panel, his eyes fixed on the view ahead. The alien command ship, a monstrous vessel that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built, was at the heart of the fleet. It was the brain of the entire operation, the source of the invaders' strategy and coordination. Without it, the aliens would be disorganized, and their forces would crumble. But getting close to the ship would be anything but easy. It was surrounded by layers of protective shields and heavily armed fighters. And even if they managed to breach those defenses, the ship itself was a fortress. Still, Jake had no choice but to trust in the plan. "We need to disable their communication systems first," Jake replied, his voice steady but laced with the tension of the moment. "Once that's done, we can start the real assault. Ruiz, you're in charge of coordinating the drones. Make sure they stay in position to cover the ground teams." "Understood," Maria responded without hesitation. Jake turned his attention to the holographic map displayed in the cockpit. It was a detailed layout of the alien command ship and its defensive perimeter. Their first goal was clear: infiltrate the ship's communication hub and shut it down. Without communication, the alien fleet would struggle to coordinate, allowing the human forces to break through their defenses. But Jake knew that wouldn't be enough. The aliens would still have the upper hand in firepower. They had to strike quickly, using every advantage they could to create chaos and confusion in the alien ranks. As Jake and his team neared the alien flagship, the first wave of resistance hit. Fighter ships and drones launched from the fleet, screaming toward their positions. The alien warships began to fire, their weapons lighting up the darkness of space with deadly bursts of energy. The fighters zipped through the chaos, exchanging shots with alien ships in a deadly dance of speed and precision. Jake's heart raced as the battle escalated around him, the air filled with the sounds of explosions and the crackle of energy weapons. His ship shook as enemy fire slammed into it. The shields flared in response, but the impact still reverberated through the hull. His co-pilot, Maria, expertly maneuvered the ship through the firestorm, evading incoming blasts with a skill that could only come from years of experience. "Hold steady, everyone," Jake barked over the comms, his voice carrying across the resistance network. "This is just the beginning. Stay focused, stay sharp." "Roger that," came O'Meal's voice, his team already engaging on the ground. "We're moving in. Just give us the signal." Jake's pulse quickened as he activated the ship's weapons. The lasers blazed to life, cutting through the alien fighters with devastating precision. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel the exhilaration of the fight, the rush of battle. But there was no time for distractions. His mind was still on the plan. The longer they spent fighting in space, the more the alien forces would adapt. They needed to move quickly. He could see the alien command ship ahead now, its vast form like a floating fortress surrounded by a defensive shield. It was massive, larger than any ship in humanity's fleet. But Jake wasn't afraid. He had faced impossible odds before, and this time he had something the aliens didn't: his team. Together, they would break through. "Maria, prepare for the next phase," Jake ordered, his voice low but firm. "We're about to make our move on the shields." The co-pilot nodded and tapped a series of commands into the ship's interface. The ship's weapon systems powered down, and in their place, a new set of protocols activated. Jake's fingers danced across his console, sending a signal to the ground teams and the rest of the fleet. The assault was about to shift. The alien shields, while formidable, had a weakness, a small but critical flaw that Jake had discovered after studying their technology. It was in the energy flow that powered their shields. If they could disrupt it at just the right moment, the shields would temporarily fail, giving the human ships a chance to strike. Olivia Park's work with the alien technology had given them the key to disabling the shields, and now it was time to put that knowledge to use. Jake's ship surged forward, its engines roaring as it broke through the chaos of battle. The alien ships fired at them with deadly accuracy, but they were too focused on the other ships to fully track Jake's movements. He took advantage of their distraction, weaving through fire, until he was close enough to the alien command ship to begin his strike. "Now, Maria," Jake shouted. With a quick command, the ship's systems activated the EMP pulse. A pulse of energy surged outward, hitting the alien shields and causing them to flicker. For a brief moment, the protective barrier wavered. And that was all they needed. Jake didn't hesitate. His ship surged forward at full speed, breaking through the weakened shield and slamming into the hull of the alien flagship. The impact was jarring, but it was nothing compared to what awaited them inside. "Teams, it's go time," Jake said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "We have minutes before the shields come back online. Hit them hard, hit them fast." The ground teams, led by O'Neill, began their assault on the flagship's exterior, using specialized tools to breach the hull. The sound of explosions echoed through the corridors as they fought their way through the ship, taking out alien soldiers and security systems with brutal efficiency. They moved like shadows, fast and deadly, catching the alien defenders off guard. Jake's team had spent months preparing for this moment, learning everything they could about the alien technology, and it showed. They fought with a precision and coordination that the aliens couldn't match. Meanwhile, Olivia and Maria worked their way to the communication hub. They had to shut down the alien systems before the shields were fully restored. The command center of the alien ship was a labyrinth of corridors, but they navigated it with ease, using their knowledge of the layout to their advantage. As they approached the heart of the ship, Olivia looked at Jake. "We're close," she said, her voice tense but determined. "We need to shut it down, or they'll regroup." Jake nodded. "Do it." Olivia set to work, her fingers flying across the alien control panel. Sparks flew as the system powered down, the hum of the alien technology gradually dying. For a moment, everything was still. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, the alien communication systems went dark. The entire ship trembled as its defensive networks went offline. Jake's eyes narrowed. This was their moment. The alien command ship had lost its coordination, and now the enemy forces were scrambling. The resistance forces began to push forward, striking with renewed intensity. The battle had shifted in their favor. But Jake knew that the war was far from over. The alien forces were still formidable, and their retreat was inevitable. The next stage of the battle was coming, and it would be even more brutal. Jake's heart raced as he prepared for the final push. "Olivia, Maria, stay with me," Jake ordered. "We're not done yet. We need to finish this now." Together, they fought their way deeper into the ship's core. The alien invaders, though caught off guard, began to regroup, their strength undiminished despite their losses. But Jake wasn't afraid. Not now. Not with his team by his side. The final battle was upon them. And Jake Sterling knew one thing for certain. Humanity was fighting for its survival, and it would not go down without a fight. The final assault had reached its most critical phase. Captain Jake Sterling's heart pounded in his chest as he and his team pushed deeper into the alien command ship. The corridors were eerily quiet, the hum of the alien technology almost deafening in the stillness. The ship's lights flickered intermittently, evidence of the chaos that had erupted throughout the vessel after their successful strike on the communication systems. It was working. The aliens were scrambling, their coordinated efforts disrupted, and their once pristine defenses now in disarray. But this was far from over. Jake knew the true battle was only beginning. "Keep moving," Jake ordered, his voice low but filled with determination. "We need to reach the central reactor and destroy it. If we don't, they'll be able to power up again, and we won't get another chance." His team responded without hesitation, each of them fully aware of what was at stake. Sergeant David O'Neill, leading the ground assault, was the first to step forward, his weapon raised and ready. His squad moved like a well-oiled machine, each member watching the others' backs. They'd trained for this moment for months, and it was paying off. The aliens were tough, but they were no match for the precision and determination of the human soldiers. "We're not out of the woods yet," O'Neill muttered into his comm, his voice gravelly but confident. "There's more resistance ahead. Let's keep moving. The sooner we disable their reactor, the sooner we can finish this." Jake nodded, though his gaze was fixed on the path ahead. He knew O'Neill was right. While the alien forces were disoriented without their communications, they were still a threat. The ship's central reactor was heavily guarded, and they'd have to get past more of the alien defenders before they could destroy it. And even once they succeeded, they had to escape. The explosion would be catastrophic, and it wouldn't take long for the alien forces to launch a counteroffensive. Olivia Park and Maria Ruiz were close behind, their expressions grim but determined. Olivia had the critical task of setting the charges on the reactor, a process that would take a few minutes. Maria's job was to keep them covered, making sure the alien forces didn't overwhelm them before the charges were set. As they moved, Olivia checked her equipment, double-checking the detonators. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. Not now. Not when they were so close. "We're almost there," Olivia said, her voice steady despite the tension that gripped her. "Just give me a few minutes to set the charges, and we'll be done. I'll make sure it's clean." Jake nodded, his eyes scanning the corridor for any signs of movement. The crew had been through hell and back, and they had come too far to fail now. They couldn't afford to be sloppy. Every second counted. The alien forces had to be regrouping, trying to protect their most vital asset, the reactor. Jake knew they had to finish what they started. If they succeeded, the alien fleet would be crippled. If they failed, Earth's last line of defense would crumble. The group continued their trek, moving swiftly through the tight corridors. They passed by flickering lights and humming machinery, alien symbols flashing along the walls. The ship was like a labyrinth, a maze of technology and weaponry. The air was thick with the smell of burned circuits and heated metal, the aftermath of their earlier attacks. Jake's footsteps were the only sound that broke the eerie silence of the ship as they closed in on the reactor. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway ahead, followed by a chorus of guttural alien voices. The tension in the air was palpable, and Jake's instincts kicked in. The aliens were close. "Get down," Jake shouted, and without hesitation, his team dove to the floor, taking cover behind the nearest bulkhead. The alien soldiers rounded the corner, their sleek black armor reflecting the dim light of the ship. They moved in perfect sync, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. They hadn't expected to be hit this hard, but Jake knew they were about to launch a counterattack. This was their last chance to stop them. "We can't let them take us out now," Jake said, his voice calm but fierce. "We push forward, no matter what." O'Neill, ever the veteran, nodded sharply. "On my mark, we charge. Everyone else, cover the rear." The tension in the air was thick. Jake could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins as the alien soldiers grew closer. His team was ready, poised for the final push. He had to trust them. They'd made it this far. They'd survive this too. "Now," O'Neill shouted. In an instant, the team sprang into action. O'Neill's squad led the charge, their weapons firing in unison. The first volley of shots hit the alien soldiers, knocking them off their feet. The rest of the team followed, moving with the precision of a well-rehearsed drill. Jake's shipmates covered the rear, ensuring no one would get caught by surprise. The firefight was fierce, the alien soldiers retaliating with ferocity. Their weapons crackled with deadly energy, but Jake's team was quicker, more agile. They knew the ship better, and they had one advantage the aliens couldn't match: their unpredictability. The humans didn't follow the aliens' rigid tactics. They adapted fast, and they kept the enemy guessing. Jake moved forward, staying close to the team as they took down the remaining alien forces one by one. His mind was focused on the task at hand, the reactor. If they could just reach it, they could end this war. As the last of the alien soldiers fell, O'Neill motioned for the team to keep moving. "Everyone, keep moving," O'Neill ordered, his voice gruff but steady. They'd reached the reactor chamber, and Jake felt a surge of hope. This was it. They could end it all now. Olivia and Maria set to work immediately, planting the charges around the reactor's core. 5 minutes to detonation, Olivia said, her hands flying over the controls. She was calm, focused, despite the chaos surrounding them. The charges were set, but now came the hard part: escaping. "We've done our part," Jake said, turning to face his team. "Now, let's get out of here." The countdown began, and the team wasted no time. They turned and ran, sprinting down the narrow hallways, the sound of explosions echoing behind them as the alien forces made one last desperate attempt to stop them. They could hear the alarms blaring, the ship's systems trying to repair themselves, but it was too late. The charges had been set. "We're almost there," Maria shouted, her voice barely audible over the blaring alarms. "Just a little further." The countdown reached its final seconds as they neared the exit. Every second felt like an eternity, and Jake's mind raced. He could already hear the rumbling of the reactor as it began to power down. The alien flagship was about to implode, and they had to get out before the explosion consumed everything. 10 seconds, Olivia yelled, her face set in determination. The team pushed forward, running at full speed. The alien ship shook violently, its walls buckling as the core destabilized. The final seconds ticked down. 5 seconds, Jake shouted, looking back at the team. They were so close, just a few more steps. The ground shook beneath their feet, and then the explosion hit. The ship's core detonated with a blinding flash, and everything went dark. Jake's last thought before the shockwave hit was simple: they had won. For humanity, for Earth. The silence that followed the explosion was deafening. Captain Jake Sterling's heart raced in his chest, his body a mixture of adrenaline and exhaustion. The blinding flash of the reactor's detonation still lingered in his vision, but the heavy thrum of the ship's sudden collapse echoed in his ears. His body was pressed against the cold metal of the ship's corridor, the walls trembling around him as if the entire alien command ship was groaning in its death throes. He could feel the vibration in his bones, the ship's systems failing, collapsing inward under the massive shockwave from the destroyed reactor. For a moment, everything was still, eerily still. The battle had stopped, the chaos of the assault suddenly silenced, and Jake thought for a fleeting moment that the war might be over. But he quickly pushed that thought aside. The fight wasn't over yet, and they weren't out of danger. "Everyone, report." Jake barked into the comms, his voice hoarse from the battle but still strong. His mind snapped into focus, shifting from victory to survival mode. There was no time to celebrate. The team was still on the alien ship, and the reactor's explosion had just triggered the final countdown for its destruction. If they didn't get off it now, the ship would disintegrate around them. "We're good, Captain," came the response from Sergeant O'Neill. His voice was calm, but Jake could hear the underlying tension in it. "We've taken out the last of their defenses, but we're not out of the woods yet. We need to get to the extraction point now." Jake nodded to himself, though no one could see him. His mind was already planning the route, scanning through the ship's schematics in his head. He glanced at the flickering holomap on the wall, where the route to their extraction point was displayed. It was a long way to go, and the ship was coming apart by the second. Their time was running out. "Olivia, Maria, you're with me. O'Neill, keep the rear covered. No one gets left behind," Jake ordered firmly, moving swiftly toward the ship's emergency evacuation route. The team didn't hesitate, moving in perfect coordination. Olivia Park, the brilliant scientist who had helped disable the alien shields, stayed close to Jake, her face set in a determined expression. The explosion had rattled her, but there was no time to dwell on it. They had a mission to complete. Maria Ruiz, the cool-headed pilot who had flown them in and out of danger countless times, was already making adjustments to her gear, ready for whatever came next. The ship shook again as another blast ripped through the hull, a deep, resonating tremor that sent dust and debris raining from the ceiling. The lights flickered, and the air grew thick with the smell of burnt metal and ozone. The path to the extraction point was getting more treacherous by the second, and the once efficient corridors of the alien ship now felt like a labyrinth of destruction. Doors were jammed shut, and the faint glow of emergency lights bathed the walls in an eerie red. "Captain," Olivia called out, her voice rising in urgency as she pointed to a section of the corridor ahead. "We need to go that way, but there's a structural breach. The ship's losing integrity in that section. We'll have to move quickly." Jake's eyes followed her gaze. The wall was visibly cracked, and there was a faint rumble beneath their feet. The ship was beginning to tear itself apart. "Lead the way," Jake said, his voice steady, though his mind was racing. "We don't have much time." With Olivia at the front, they pushed forward, each step more hurried than the last. The air was thick with smoke, and the temperature was rising as the damaged systems vented heat into the corridors. Every few steps, the ship would tremble, sending them into momentary disarray. But they never slowed. They had a job to do, and Jake knew they were the last hope for humanity. There was no turning back now. As they reached a narrow hallway, the ship shook violently, and a loud crash echoed from behind them. A section of the wall collapsed, blocking the path they had just taken. The sound of metal scraping against metal filled the air as the ship continued to implode. "Stay close," Jake shouted, urging them forward. The extraction point was just ahead, but with each passing second, the ship seemed to be on the brink of total collapse. They reached the extraction bay, a small reinforced docking station designed for emergency evacuations. The rest of the resistance fleet was waiting, their ships hovering just outside the bay, ready to scoop up the team as soon as they got to safety. The only problem was that the doors to the bay were still sealed, and the countdown clock on the wall above them was ticking down with relentless precision. "Damn it, come on," Maria cursed, her hands working furiously at the controls of the emergency door mechanism. "These systems were never meant to work in this kind of chaos. We're running out of time." "Do what you can, Maria," Jake said, trying to keep his voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. "We don't have much longer. I'll cover you." As Maria continued to work on the door, Olivia looked at Jake. "Do you think we made it? Do you think the others got away?" she asked, her voice soft, but filled with a deep, quiet worry. Jake didn't answer immediately. He knew the question wasn't just about the extraction point. It was about the rest of the human race, the rest of their team. He thought of the civilians they'd left behind, the countless soldiers who had given their lives, and the billions on Earth who were counting on this mission to succeed. "I don't know," Jake said finally, his voice filled with resolve. "But I know we can't stop now. We make it out of here, and we make sure the rest of humanity has a future. That's all that matters." Just then, the door slid open with a hiss, revealing the docking bay beyond. The team wasted no time in rushing forward, but as they stepped through the threshold, a final blast from the alien ship's core rocked the station. Jake stumbled, his balance faltering for a split second, but Maria was right there, steadying him. The bay doors opened fully as their extraction ship descended. Jake, Olivia, and Maria were the first to board, with O'Neill and his team following close behind. The last of the resistance fighters rushed in, and the ship's hatch slammed shut with a heavy thud. The extraction ship's engines roared to life as it lifted off, soaring away from the wreckage of the alien flagship just as it began to break apart. Jake turned to look out the viewport, watching as the alien command ship collapsed into itself. The once mighty vessel, now a twisted mass of burning metal and shattered technology, began to fragment, disintegrating into the void of space. It was a victory, a resounding blow against the invaders. But Jake knew that the war was far from over. This battle had been won, but the alien threat still loomed over Earth. "We did it," Maria said quietly, her voice tinged with exhaustion, but also a quiet pride. We stopped them. Jake didn't say anything at first. He simply stared at the wreckage of the ship they'd destroyed, the distant stars beyond. Then, after a long silence, he spoke. "For now," he said quietly, "but the real fight is just beginning." The war wasn't over, but humanity had survived this day. And with every fiber of his being, Jake Sterling knew that they would keep fighting, because they were human, and they would never give up. The extraction ship surged forward into the blackness of space, carrying them to safety. But the war, humanity's fight for survival, was far from over. The hum of the extraction ship's engines was a comforting constant, a stark contrast to the chaos they had just left behind. Captain Jake Sterling leaned back in his seat, staring out the small viewport, watching as the debris from the alien command ship drifted away into the vastness of space. His mind was still racing. It was over, at least for now. The alien command ship was destroyed, its forces scattered and disoriented. But Jake knew that one battle was just a small piece of the war that was far from won. "Captain," Maria Ruiz's voice broke through his thoughts, soft but steady. "We're clear of the wreckage. The fleet's in position to rendezvous. We can head back to base." Jake nodded without turning to look at her, though he appreciated the reassurance. "Good," he replied, his voice still heavy with the weight of the mission. "Let's get back. We'll need to regroup and plan our next move." He could feel the eyes of his team on him, even though they remained silent. The tension in the air was palpable. They had won this battle, but the cost had been immense. His team was still intact, but so many others, soldiers, civilians, had sacrificed their lives to bring them to this point. The pain of loss, though quiet now, would never fully leave him. "Jake, you good?" Olivia Park's voice came through the comm, breaking the silence again. It was a simple question, but one that carried weight. She could see the toll this mission had taken on him. She always could. Jake sighed deeply, his eyes still locked on the stars. "Yeah, just thinking. It's hard to wrap my head around everything. We've taken a huge step forward today, but the war's not over. The aliens aren't just going to roll over." Olivia didn't answer immediately. Instead, she let her words hang in the air, knowing that Jake needed time to process. The calm, intellectual side of Olivia understood his burden. She had seen what the aliens were capable of. She had seen firsthand the destruction they could wreak. The victory today was a small one in the grand scheme of things, but it was still a victory, and it was more than they had dared hope for just hours ago. "We need to get back to Earth. The Resistance needs to hear about what happened here, Jake," Olivia finally said. "We've got a lot to prepare for, a lot to rebuild." Jake's gaze shifted away from the stars, his thoughts focusing on the words she had spoken. She was right. They needed to share the success of this mission with the rest of the Resistance. The destruction of the alien command ship would ripple across the invaders' ranks like a shockwave. It would be a blow to their leadership, to their morale. But as Olivia had pointed out, this was just the beginning. Earth wasn't safe yet. "Yeah," Jake muttered, a bitter edge to his tone. "There's a lot of rebuilding to do. I'm not sure the rest of the world is ready for what comes next, but they'll have to be." The words were heavy, but they were necessary. Humanity had lived in a state of quiet survival for too long, too uncertain of their fate in this new world. This war had forced them into constant adaptation, into fighting not just for victory, but for survival. And now, they had a chance to hit back. It was time to capitalize on the momentum they'd earned. The extraction ship hummed steadily, cutting through the silence of space as they made their way back to the fleet's rendezvous point. The rest of the team, Maria, O'Neill, and the others, were still processing everything, just as Jake was. They had fought bravely, and their unity had carried them through the most dangerous mission humanity had ever faced. But their work wasn't over. They had a new enemy to face now, the alien leadership that remained, the invaders who had only suffered one of many defeats. "How much time until we reach the fleet?" Jake asked, breaking the silence once more. His tone was calm, though there was an underlying urgency. Time was something they couldn't afford to waste. The longer they stayed in space, the more vulnerable they were to the aliens regrouping. "Just under an hour, Captain," Maria answered crisply, her fingers dancing over the controls. "The fleet's ready. We'll be rendezvousing with the others shortly." Jake nodded. He didn't have to look at her to know that Maria was already thinking ahead. She always did. She had the ability to stay focused, even in the chaos of battle, and it was something that had earned her the respect of everyone around her. Jake turned to Olivia, who had been sitting silently, her eyes scanning the data that was streaming in from the rest of the fleet. "Olivia," Jake started, his voice softer now, "I need you to help me analyze the intel we collected from the alien command ship. There has to be something in there we can use to our advantage. Any weaknesses, any key strategies they've been using. We can't afford to miss anything." Olivia nodded, her fingers already flying across her console. "I'm on it. I'll make sure we get everything we can. There's bound to be more in that data. If we're lucky, we might even have a shot at taking down more of their fleet with the right information." It was clear that Olivia had already begun thinking about their next moves. She knew that their victory had been crucial, but it had been one battle in a war that would stretch across months, maybe even years. If they were to win the war for humanity, they needed to turn this brief moment of triumph into an opportunity for a much larger victory. Maria spoke again, this time with a slight chuckle in her voice. "Looks like we're going back to Earth for a debrief. Think they'll let us sleep first?" Jake allowed himself a tired smile at her words, though it was tinged with exhaustion. "If we're lucky, Maria. If we're lucky." As the extraction ship continued its course, the vastness of space stretched out before them. The blackness outside the viewport, dotted with the distant glow of stars, was a reminder of the enormous task still ahead of them. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but as the debris of the alien flagship drifted away, Jake couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. They had dealt a blow to the invaders, and they had shown the aliens that humanity was capable of fighting back. And for the first time in months, Jake allowed himself to believe that humanity might actually have a chance in this war. The rendezvous with the fleet was seamless. As the extraction ship docked with the larger battleship, Jake felt the familiar rush of adrenaline drain from his body, replaced by an overwhelming weariness. His legs felt like lead, and his arms ached, the weight of the battle settling in on his bones. As the hatch opened and the team disembarked, the crew of the battleship gave them a standing ovation. It wasn't much, but it was something. "We did it," O'Neill said quietly, his voice rough from the prolonged engagement. "We actually did it." Jake turned to face his team, the ones who had followed him through every step of this mission. They were tired, bloodied, and broken in ways that no one could see. But they had done it. They had made it through. And that, in itself, was an accomplishment. He smiled, just a little, then turned to the rest of the fleet. There was much work ahead of them, but for the first time in this endless struggle, humanity had a small victory to build on. "All right," Jake said, his voice carrying over the comms to everyone gathered. "Let's get to work. We've won this round, but the war's far from over. Now we turn this victory into a real chance to win the war." As his team nodded, ready for whatever came next, Jake looked out over the fleet. The stars beckoned them forward, and with each passing day, humanity would rise higher, stronger, and more united. The war was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, Jake was sure of one thing: humanity would not fall. Not now. Not ever.